In late October 1929, the stock market shed more than a third of its value in a single week. Across Wall Street, the panic was absolute, as fortunes built over a decade evaporated in a matter of hours. Abraham Germansky, a highly successful real estate developer who had bet heavily on the booming market, was ruined by the drop. He was last seen wandering toward Broadway, tearing a strip of ticker tape into pieces. At the exact same moment, another investor named Jesse Livermore returned home to a terrified family. He had shorted the market, betting stocks would decline. Over the course of a single day, Livermore made the inflation-adjusted equivalent of $3 billion. While Livermore celebrated becoming one of the richest men in the world, average investors were forced to liquidate their remaining physical assets for fractions of their value, just to survive the month. We tend to look at the acquisition of immense wealth as the ultimate financial victory. But focusing entirely on the gains blinds us to how fragile that success actually is. 4 years after his $3 billion triumph, Jesse Livermore's story took a sharp turn. High on his own confidence, he took on increasing amounts of debt, made larger bets, and lost his entire fortune in the market. Broke and ashamed, he eventually took his own life. Livermore and Germansky shared a specific trait. They were both exceptionally good at getting wealthy and equally bad at staying wealthy. Getting money requires taking risks, being highly optimistic, and putting yourself out there. But keeping it requires the exact opposite. It requires frugality, humility, and a persistent fear that what you've made can be taken away. Navigating this reality requires a barbell personality. You have to balance a deep, long-term optimism with a short-term paranoia about what might prevent you from reaching that future. This chart tracks U.S. real GDP per capita over 170 years. The long-term macroeconomic trajectory is overwhelmingly positive, but that single upward line contains the Great Depression, 9 major wars, a flu pandemic, and 33 separate recessions. Earning big returns is not the most important variable in financial success. The ability to stick around for a long time without wiping out or being forced to give up is what allows compounding the time it needs to work. So how do you actually survive and generate wealth in a future filled with unknowns? The answer lies in the statistical concept of tails, the farthest ends of a distribution of outcomes. Consider Heinz Berggruen, an art dealer who fled Nazi Germany and amassed a collection of Picassos and Matisses valued at well over $1 billion. Berggruen didn't possess supernatural foresight. He bought vast quantities of art like an index fund. He acquired everything he could, fully expecting that 99% of his acquisitions would be practically worthless. He only needed the remaining 1% to be masterpieces. Walt Disney experienced the exact same dynamic. By the mid-1930s, his studio had produced over 400 cartoons. Most of them lost a fortune, pushing him to the brink of bankruptcy. Then he released Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which paid off all company debts and funded a new state-of-the-art studio. Both Berggruen and Disney were saved by singular tail events. Their records show that you can be wrong most of the time, fail almost constantly, and still win big, provided you survive long enough for a tail event to emerge. This math of frequent failure isn't limited to individual art collectors or volatile animation studios. It applies to the most established corporations in the public markets. This chart shows established public companies experiencing catastrophic loss, losing at least 70% of their value, never to recover. In technology and telecom, over half wipe out. Across the entire market, 4 out of 10 eventually suffer catastrophic loss. Yet during the same period where 40% of the Russell 3000 index effectively failed, the overall index increased more than 73-fold. That massive aggregate growth was driven almost entirely by 7% of the component companies that radically overperformed. The few extraordinary winners were more than enough to offset the constant stream of duds. Because tail events drive the majority of outcomes, experiencing frequent losses is not necessarily a sign of bad investing. It is the inescapable mathematical reality of seeking a fortune. If you manage to survive the setbacks and capture a tail event, you eventually face the final question: what is the actual utility of having wealth? Consider the perspective of a hotel valet whose job is to park high-end luxury vehicles for wealthy clients. The guests pull up in Ferraris and Rolls-Royces, assuming the cars signal to everyone around them that they have made it. But the valet almost never looks at the driver. When people see a luxury car, They bypass admiring the person behind the wheel. Instead, they use the wealth on display as a benchmark for their own desires, imagining themselves in the driver's seat. This is the paradox. People want wealth to signal to others that they should be admired, but using money to buy visible luxury items fails to deliver the respect and admiration they actually crave. In 1981, psychologist Angus Campbell published a comprehensive study on happiness. He found that well-being couldn't be cleanly predicted by income, geography, or education. The single most powerful common denominator of happiness was simply having a strong sense of control over one's life. The median family income in the United States in the 1950s was less than half of what it is today, adjusted for inflation. Yet, despite having less physical wealth, people in that era often possessed something highly valuable: clearer boundaries around their time. Because labor was primarily physical, work definitively ended the moment a worker clocked out and left their tools on the factory floor. At the time, John D. Rockefeller was a rare exception. His job wasn't to move physical material. His product was what he figured out inside his head. Because his mind was his tool, he was constantly working, thinking problems through even when sitting quietly. Today, the modern economy is full of knowledge workers. We use our brains as our primary tools. And because we take our heads with us everywhere, the psychological burden of work never actually stops. We are theoretically on the clock at all hours. As the boundaries of work have dissolved, our baseline control over our own time has plummeted. This loss of autonomy neutralizes the happiness that our increased modern wealth is supposed to provide. True wealth is entirely invisible. It is not a sports car or a luxury home. It is the unspent assets that grant you the ultimate dividend, the freedom to wake up every morning and decide exactly what you want to do with your time.